Hello. Well, I was thinking about some ways that we talk about how we think. And when I'm looking around and thinking about how people think and how they interact with each other based on the way that they think. I mean, there's easy things like, well, people who think that are stupid, people who say that are stupid. Fine. Let's talk a little bit more about when we used what seem like technical terms. Some of them are they all, in fact, the ones that sound clinical, the ones that sound as though there must be some weight of research, some weight uh, of validity to them, and a lot of them do have it, and a lot of them don't. And then some are kind of weird in that they began without, but turned out through further looking that they're pretty strong. And yet you can't tell the difference between that and something which just took hold and became a thing about how everybody knows that the mind works, or that people think that way, or that it's that this is something you can say about the way other people are thinking. Okay. Geez. Okay. This little bit that I'm going to talk about isn't what's on my mind. It's what I'm using as an example. I will pick two idiotic things about brains. And one of them, everybody knows is dumb, and why. And the other one is widely used as reference and even has turned into kind of a professionalized and frankly exploited term, and it's dumb in the first place. So the first one has to do with this business about how you only use a certain percent of your brain. And now we all know that's not true. Up until a certain point, it was widely referenced enough and widely thought enough that it was just ordinary speech. Everyone just knew, you use 10% of your brain, or whatever. And it was really hard to shake. You could tell people that wasn't the case, and you could talk about why, and you could talk about even where the terminology came from and how it sort of settled into a cultural shape, which is different from its original phrasing, both dumb. And it just wouldn't work. It would just bounce off people. But then there was a Mythbusters episode. Oh, well, you see, now it was on the Mythbusters, and now it's cool to know that that's not the case. And so now you say that in some sort of popular entertainment or something, or somebody reads something or views something old where it was invoked, and they go, "Oh, yeah, other people they thought that." But it's just because the Mythbusters said so that validated culturally that everybody can now not know that. Take it from somebody who was teaching otherwise for a very long time and got to observe plenty of very difficult things filter in or get analyzed in, or experientially learned that no, X, Y, or Z isn't what's going on, that it's this other thing, often on some very difficult topics. But this is one, as my neurological researcher friends and teaching friends could tell you, that was just immovable. Nope. Two hipsters on Mythbusters. Fix that problem. And here's another one that's similar. And remember, we're in a divergence right now, okay? These are the two things that are in my little divergence. I'll get to the main road in a bit. The second thing also concerns the brain, and it has to do with, very technically, with what's called the Triune Brain, where you have, depending on who's talking, you would have the mammalian brain section, and you would have the lizard brain or reptile brain section, and then you would have the more ancient kind of fish brain section. And the idea being that this somehow corresponded to hindbrain, midbrain, and forebrain in reverse, and that it also represented kind of this layered on evolutionary addition of structure, and function. This was made up by a high status psychologist in the late 60s, or during the 60s, and published around then. And then I was tolerated. First of all, he was high status. He was the head of the academic organization. He was the chief editor of the journal, and this was his little bugaboo that he made up one day. And any biologist, running across this, basically just spit out their coffee through their nose, and it's like, what on earth are you blithering about? It's one of the dumbest things ever said by anybody. And then, of course, it was confounded with the other long-standing notion that somehow this front of the brain, because I don't know, front is better than back, like in a car seating or something. The front of the brain was thinky and the middle or back of the brain was feely, which led to a large amount of stupidity. God, I could go on and on about the stupidity of poor Neanderthals with their the brain shape, which kind of bulges backwards, and so everybody's like, "Oh, I see. So they were more emotional than." But anyway, that forward and back, the front seats and back seats of the car notion of thought and feeling of the brain get a little bit confounded with this triune brain notion. That you've got these evolutionary layers of the brain, which add function and add awareness and rationality and stuff like that. They're both stupid. They get blended together, and people this has been incorporated everywhere. So the term limbic system, which was coined by the same person to refer to the feely, what he thought of as the middle part, the midbrain being the reptile brain, which was feely, right? And so anyway, that was his nonsense. But he made up the term limbic system, which today is used in neurology simply structurally to point to specific pieces in that location, period. The whole seat of the emotions, this sort of notion of the limbic system is this boiling cauldron of lust. It's where your id is, right? This, give me strength. Anyway, with all this nonsense, you cannot shake among people today. Walk down the street, try it. Walk down the street, talk to a friend, talk to anyone say, oh yeah, that's the lizard brain going on there. Their forebrain, shuts down, the lizard brain takes over, right? They're not thinking anymore. And the response, oh yeah. Everyone believes it. It's unshakable through teaching, through thought. Not without a studied educational process, which is vastly more profound than just the notion of examining this or that particular thing. So that's the difference, though. What's the difference between those? Mythbusters. You need hipsters, and you need a popular venue, and you need it to be the thing to do to know that, what the hipster said, to be a smart guy. Oh, one Mythbusters episode, kicking the triune brain to the curb, and it'll go the same way as the 10% of your brain thing. And there's nothing I can do to help that, unless I were in some position of considerable academic power, not only among me and my classes, but also in terms of myself, publishing, and colleagues, and therefore impact on pedagogy throughout a discipline. And even then, we're just talking about university teaching. I mean, what sort of impact is that on society, oddly enough? Okay. That was my divergence. That was my example of things people know. And those were just like two factoids. Now, I, being a biologist, think those are more than just factoids, but, What do I know? Let's talk a little more about generalizations, about broad strokes of thinking and our names for those, where they came from, which are valid, stuff like that. A lot of them come about because somebody is having a beer or martini with somebody at a meeting and says something in a particularly pithy way, and then their name gets sort of, associated with that. May or may not involve publication of some kind, and that publication may or may not be an actual journal article in the academic literature. It may well just be something that they spouted off to a journalist, and the journalist wrote it down. And then there are things that are just made up by journalists and the people that they're talking to. Okay, let's give a couple of examples. One of the best is cognitive dissonance, which was proposed in a fairly academic sense, but it was very much proposed as sort of a, hey, look, that happens. Over the years, it's been revisited many times, and of course with people with nothing better to do than quibble over whether the precise original phrasing was the way we should be talking about this or not. But by and large, cognitive dissonance has turned out to be a very useful concept. I myself thought some years ago, when people started spouting off about Dunning-Kruger, that this was just a fancy-ass way to call people stupid, with no particular basis, just because somebody does a study sometime. Well, psychology is littered with a bunch of studies sometime, much of which really should have saved the trees. But as it turns out, I'm involved in this hobby called role-playing, and I'm very much in the end of it that you don't see in shows like Critical Role. And I deal a lot with actually role-playing as a creative activity, as something that is not a subsidiary to some other media, and is, for lack of a better word, non-professionalized art. So I do this, and the discourse in that community or widespread hobby-oriented practitioners of different things that feel like they have to have an opinion about it, or who are monetizing aspects of it themselves, the discourse about it is comically wretched. I mean, tremendously stupid. And therefore, in encountering individuals who are using these degrees of confusion very much as a way to profiteer, I'm talking to people and dealing with people, and, these bad behaviors are going around left and right, all sorts of passive aggressive and deceptive bullshit everywhere. And you're going, wow, that is Dunning-Kruger. So I don't know. That's very unscientific. I can't say whether Dunning-Kruger really is a thing. I can say that perhaps through confirmation bias, another pretty, say, a validated concept, through confirmation bias, I'm saying, well, yeah, I don't know if it's a thing or not, but if it isn't, then that person has what it isn't. Okay, what isn't? What does they have it? They do that. So I don't know if we're just talking about a thing people do as just simply a confluence of other perfectly understood and perfectly, reprehensible but known behaviors, and they just kind of converge in a particular way, or whether it is, a thing. That I don't know. Now, here are a couple that are a lot like the Triune Brain in that they are widely stated and taken as fact. And again, you can just, I don't care if you present the actual history of the original publication of something and then show how it's proliferated through repetition. When I say publication, I mean like in a magazine article or something like that. And then it proliferates through word of mouth. People pick it up. It sounds good to say it. It feels good to say it. The way people respond to you when you say it feels good, and it explains, it says a thing that you like knowing is the way it is. So therefore it takes on extraordinary power, just like the Triune Brain. It makes you feel good to think that you've got, you have the good brain. And a couple of ones that are probably going for any number of people watching this, presuming that there is in fact any number of people watching this at some point. I mean, I get my views, but I don't really analyze the metrics too carefully. I don't know how long you sit through this crap. So, positing any human actually having sat through it this long, you'll probably turn it off at this point, because I'm going to say that things aren't. And we all know that there are kooks on the internet who will tell you what is and isn't. And when you go to one and you say, trust your gut. If you don't think it feels right, then you should stop listening, because that guy's probably, well, okay, that here it comes. To take them in historical order, one is bystander syndrome. Kitty Genovese was killed in the early 60s. The discussion of that case really boomed about 10 to 15 years later, in the late 70s. Sort of got resurrected as a topic. And based on the early reporting, and I think people had been talking about it this way almost from the beginning, and then the way it had been talked about just blossomed at this point when I was about, 14. And it became known, just known. Everybody knows that, people watched Kitty Genovese get stabbed to death multiple times, and they watched from balconies in front of their apartments with drinks in their hands, maybe carrying on their conversation about, Marshall McLuhan or something with each other, while she, stumbled down the street crying for help, as she was being stabbed to death. None of which happened. But everyone knows it happens, and everybody knows there's a thing called bystander syndrome. And they know what bystander syndrome is. People do that. There's nothing there. There's another one for which there is nothing there. And the something that came along to fill the void is fairly nauseatingly evident once you accept, which you won't, because you know better. But once you accept that there's nothing there, and then you see what did replace it, it's fairly appalling. This one is Stockholm Syndrome. Due to a number of interesting events of the early 70s, and due in particular to a court case, which I venture to say is one of the most high-impact court cases in the late 20th century, toward culture. Not toward legalities, that's for sure, not toward precedents, but to culture. Stockholm Syndrome is this notion that should you be captured by heinous persons and held in captivity for any period of time, that you will, as a defense mechanism, take up their point of view or become sympathetic to them as humans. And therefore, when you are finally released, rescued, etc., that you are curiously not playing the right role that you should be playing. You're not delivering the right lines that you need to be saying, so that these heinous persons are treated like the diseased dogs that they are, and that we can do whatever we want and to them, and the situation can be closed as these criminals / crazy people / radicals can be written off. No, here you are talking about their point of view. Here you are talking about, how they treated you, and, they didn't, this isn't the way they didn't treat you like that. That's not the right movie. If they treated you like that, the way you're saying, then no, that they wouldn't be playing the part that we need them to play. So Stockholm Syndrome is completely made up. There is no instance in which this occurred. It has older roots with people who behaved this way after being in captivity in North Korean forces during the Korean War. And they came back saying things that they weren't supposed to say. First of all, it was on TV at one point, and then later on after they came home. And it was just given that the commies obviously had a mind control ray or a mind control drug. And it's impossible that these people could just, mean what they were saying, and that anything that they could be saying like that could be true. Particularly not on TV, damn it. Everyone's watching. Come on. So it was very similar with Stockholm Syndrome. And it was especially, as I implied a bit ago, especially boomed into popular vocabulary via the Patty Hearst trial. So, no, there isn't one. We are not talking about a term that is backed up by any phenomenon happening. And then when you go and you look at what was going on with the Americans captured by Korean forces, and who knows what was going on with Patty Hearst, because that has been a topic of confusion. But the phenomenon that everyone knows is real. Stockholm Syndrome isn't. It became extraordinarily useful in the context of people who, upon being in that situation, did not have the sense to get killed so that their story could be conveniently told by the people whose job it is to get the right story in the right place and in the right way. So, anyways, all of that is sort of the background context for me thinking today, and over the last couple of days, about a phenomenon that I think is perhaps more accessible to people to think about right now than it might otherwise have been, which is the phenomenon of people making no sense whatsoever in their rhetoric concerning where they stand, where you stand, where they stand, they being, others, and what right-minded people, are willing to do and go to bat for and put their lives on the line for, and otherwise, be fully committed to, vote for anything that says the right thing. Doesn't matter if they're for that, they're against this, get them in there. We're in a crisis. So clearly, the example that is going to be the most accessible to most people today concerns vaccination. And I'm not talking about, not so sure, okay? Not so sure about anything is not the worst behavior in the world. And I know a great deal of the history of the stupidities, abuses, missteps of medicine through the decades and centuries. And so I get that. What I am talking about is what I described before, just a couple minutes ago, when I talked about the point of view where you're not hesitant, you're not unsure. Oh, you're sure, all right. And you are definite. And you have decided to, or have learned that this is so critical that, as I say, it's time, it's time to go to the wall. And unlike a lot of people who talk about it being time to go for a wall, there is a significant sector of society, and always has been, that is willing to go for the wall and does so routinely. And although they may not get what they want right then and there, it's those people, the policies that they represent do have a tendency to get into place and stay. So those of you who think that the civil rights movement, reformed the injustice system toward Black Americans or any number of other people back there in the 60s and 70s, well, it didn't. So just as an example. So let's go ahead and look at these points of view. And one of the things that is quickly evident in these points of view is that they aren't reasoned arguments. In fact, they're about as they're so far away from being reasoned arguments that they are often, you can't respond to them except with jokes usually, or the reflexive dismissal of the person just saying, okay, well, they flipped their lid. I mean, there's just no talking to people who flipped their lid. To divert just for a second, because I live in Sweden where this is an ongoing issue, and I grew up in central coastal California where it's an ongoing issue. There's the rhetoric of immigration, of whatever sort, undocumented or otherwise, which routinely combines the two phrases, lazy asses who use up our resources, drain our societal resources, don't give back. They're just fucking parasites, right? Bloated ticks on our body politic. And they take our jobs. The sons of bitches. They work harder than we do, and they work for cheaper. And so they screw up the whole economy, and they screw up, the way that we're supposed to be living, working, getting paid, living, working, getting paid. They screw it all up because they work so fucking hard, and they do it all the time, and they do it for shitty pay. Fascinating. I mean, you're listening to this, and it's coming at you, and it's probably coming at you with some spit spray, and you're kind of going, that's not a thing. How? What? Right. So anyway, if you are familiar with this kind of sort of A and B, and so with the vaccination, of course, you have the thing where, okay, well, COVID's not a disease. I mean, no, you're not really fucking, it's not that sick. That's not happening. I mean, you don't get that sick. And then the other one is, you do. I mean, it's heinous. It's terrible, and they gave it to us so they could get this vaccine into you, right? So it is deadly, and you're kind of going, is it bad or not? I mean, is the infection of this viral infection bad or not? I mean, I don't get it. Which one do you mean? I mean, if the Chinese gave it to us as, like hit America with it, the bastards, as an attack, with this deadly disease, but on the other hand, we don't want to vaccinate or wear a mask or anything because it's not that bad. It's, that's a liberal, myth or liberal lie. Well, I don't know, which is it? I mean, it's like the immigration thing. You're going, did you just say those two things? So the same phenomenon occurs a lot. And having been in a number of situations where somebody belligerent is calling me something interesting, like, a little cocksucker or something, and making their case, it's very similar. It's very similar. This is an identifiable phenomenon. It's not just that person is stupid and can't get their facts straight and is spraying out whatever they've heard like a little sort of recorded megaphone. This is a phenomenon. This is a thing people do, is to actually deliver completely insanely contradictory things as a mode of coherent disapproval, defiance, and readiness for violence. And it's not because they're stupid and their mind is shut off so that they can't process logic anymore because they're so emotional. No, I think it's a thing. I think this is a display. Now, you're going to say, oh, so you think it's deliberate? Oh, shut up about deliberate. I mean, words like that are of no interest to me whatsoever. I'm interested in whether this is a behavior that people do that has an effect that in some social manner they know. They recognize perhaps that this is the case. Whether they see recognize is just as bad as deliberate. The feedback that they get from doing it socially, if that occurs, then that is going to say to them, yes, do that, that's working. But it has to be a thing that they do for that to happen. It can't be just some sort of confluence of accidental influences, in the moment. They won't have it to recover and do again if that were the case. No, so I think this is actually an identifiable behavior. something that could have a name. And the if you will, the psychology, if that's the word we want to use behind it, is rather straightforward in the sense that if you are imposing your threat upon another and you want them at the very least to shut up and back down in this conversation, I mean, you want to dominate them in this conversation. You want the submission or the shut up. And you know that this is social. People are listening. People are involved in this. This may get repeated. This may be known. And so there's a quality of display here. Your impact is enhanced in those social terms if you're unfair. It's exactly like physical bullying, where, you do something that is blatantly what you're about to accuse the other person of doing. You go up and, you sock somebody, and, if they start, trying to sock you back, you're like, what, you're trying to hit me? Hey, he's trying to hit me. You can activate, right? Then at that point, you're like, that guy tried to hit me. Or you go up and do anything that provokes some kind of a combat. You go and you give some wisecrack, and the person wisecracks back. And you're like, what did you say? What did you say? Right? So the point is that it's phenomenally unfair. And that's part of the display, you see. That's what you're displaying, is that you can be grossly unfair. You can make no sense. And you know what? They still have to take it. It's being displayed, this very thing. And I think it's really common. I think it's really powerful. I think it has more convincing power. Without being rhetoric, it has more rhetorical power than rhetoric in making your point known around and about and socially, both about who you are, what you stand for, what you're about, and how it's going to happen that way. And if somebody could make a name for it, I'd like that.